Thank you, Shell, for that fine introduction, and it's my pleasure to kick things off this evening. I'm sure you're all familiar with John Gray's contention that men and women are from different planets. And if not from different planets, I think it's at least safe to assume that we act as though we're from different cultures. If we define culture as habits or patterns gained from past experiences, then certainly the past experiences of women and men differ significantly from the time of birth. Now, there's a researcher by the name of Deborah Tannen who has a very interesting phrase for this. She calls it complementary schismogenesis. And we can define this as a mutually aggravating spiral. So if you've ever had a conversation with the opposite gender that feels like it's just spinning downward, then you've experienced this condition in your life. One person describes this condition as the practical joke that can be played with a dual control electric blanket. Let's say we switch the controls without either person knowing about it. And so I'm too cold, and so I turn my control up. That makes the other person too hot, and so they turn their control down, making me colder yet. And so each attempt to correct the error actually increases it. I kind of think of complementary schismogenesis as a pendulum, because actually, in most of our disagreements, I think we actually start pretty close to the center. But then this person says something that knocks this one a little bit to the right, and this one says something that knocks this person out a little bit to the left. And then as they increase their comments and start talking about each other's personalities, then pretty soon we're way out here at the extremes. And complementary schismogenesis is very much like that. As relationships become long-term, women and men have different ideas about how the relationship should change. This is true in marriage or any long-term relationship. This is what women think. After all this time, you should know what I want without my telling you. Can some of you women relate to that? Okay. This is what men think. After all this time, we should be able to tell each other what we want. Okay, women, after all this time, you should know what I want without my telling you. Men, after all this time, we should be able to tell each other what we want. Those are incongruent. They're opposites. So there are several ways that we can talk about this difference. One way is to talk about the two very important communication factors of independence and involvement. Now, everyone has a need for both of these, but the research indicates that women have a relatively greater need for involvement, and men have a relatively greater need for independence. My wife and I host a lot of gatherings at our house for professors and students and administrators. And so let's say that at one of these gatherings, I notice that my wife's drink is empty. And so without saying anything, I go over, fill up her drink, and take it to her. What that means to her is that I'm paying attention. And the payoff there for women is in terms of involvement. Now, I would add one caution here, though. Around the age of 40, a change takes place, and all of a sudden, men start wanting more involvement, and women start wanting more independence, okay? Now, it can happen a little bit younger for some people, and for others it can happen perhaps as late as the early or mid-50s. But that change does take place where the lines cross. And there are some other things happening in our culture that I think we need to take note of too. One of those is the increasing number of stay-at-home dads. Because I think one could assume that if a dad is staying home, then his rate of involvement is probably going to be higher. And the second factor that we need to consider is the pay, especially in large urban areas, between women and men. Because what's happening among young people is that the women are significantly out-earning the men, especially in areas like New York, Atlanta, and other large urban areas. And so you have to wonder, And we could speculate some about how are those changes going to change that formula between independence and involvement. How's it going to change that balance? Men and women have different ways of paying attention to conversations. Men tend to pay attention to what is said or the message, and women tend to pay attention to how it's said or the meta message. So if I tell my wife, I love you, I hear the words, but she hears the way it was said or the paralanguage. And that can give us different points of view on almost any topic. Now keep in mind, some of these meta messages that women send are done non-verbally, and men don't always pick up on those. In fact, I have an example of that from my own life that I refer to simply as the laundry incident. Okay? Now, my excuse here is this happened many years ago, before I was aware of all these differences, okay? At the time, the decision in the household was that my wife would do the laundry because she felt like that was the least of the evils. And I decided I would clean kitchens and bathrooms, and so that was part of the division of labor. This was at a time when I was teaching 4 night classes, accelerated night classes, back to back to back to back. And so I was almost essentially working a night job, and she was working a day job. Well, I remember coming home one Monday evening, and the laundry was done, and it was folded neatly, but it was in the living room instead of in the drawers and closets where it normally was. And my wife was already asleep. I didn't think much about it. So the next day, I just got up from bed, trotted out into the living room, got my clothes, went back into the bedroom, got dressed, and left. And this went on for about 3 days. And the third day, I remember my wife said, "So, I guess you know I'm mad at you." And I hate to admit it as a communication professor, but no, I didn't know. Now, if she had said, "You've done X, and that makes me angry," the message I would have understood, but she was telling me non-verbally that I had done something. I can't remember what relationship sin that I committed anymore, but whatever it was, she was sending me a non-verbal meta message. Two of the 5 most common complaints that wives have concerning their husbands is that he doesn't talk to me and he doesn't listen to me. So let's address that first one, he doesn't talk to me. One of the most common stereotypes that we have of the American male is the strong, silent type. John Wayne would have to be the epitome. What about Arnold Schwarzenegger? Rambo, is he even capable of speech? Okay? Clint Eastwood. These are not real talkative guys. Men know that women are attracted to that kind of man as a lover, and so they want to be that guy. But what happens in a long-term relationship is that that man who is a lure as a lover turns into a bit of a lug as a husband. Because let's say one evening you want to have a deep conversation about the relationship. The strong silent type is not necessarily the kind of man who's inclined to have those kinds of conversations. On the other end of it, he doesn't listen to me. If there's no talking and no listening, there is a problem in the relationship. Listening noises are those sounds that you make when you're in a listening role. And women make more listening noises and expect others to make more listening noises when they're in a listening role. So let's say that a woman is listening to a man talk, and she's making these listening noises. To her, that means, I hear you and I understand you. But from his point of view, those noises mean, I agree with you. So let's say she cheers him on by using these listening noises, and it comes out later that she doesn't agree. Well, that reinforces his stereotype that women are unreliable. Let's say that he's in the listening role, and he's not making too many listening noises. What does she think? He's not paying attention to me, when in fact he may be, but he doesn't agree with her. And so that's one of the great secrets of communication. So we can ask ourselves then, how is it that these differences come about? What they have found is that children learn to have conversations from their peers between the ages of 5 and 15. So think about your own development. During that time period, during that age, most children play with same-sex friends. But if during that time period, the ages 5 to 15, you had a lot of opposite-sex friends, then some of the things I'm telling you may just be opposite for you in terms of your relationships. Girls at that age like to play cooperatively, and if they can't cooperate, the group breaks up. Boys, on the other hand, it's a little bit easier to get into a group, but once you do, you have to compete for your status. And the way you do that is through talk and through conversations. So along about the age of 16 and 17, when men and women start dating, they come to those relationships with much different ideas about how to use conversations. They still hold those divergent ideas but fail to recognize it. So let's say they talk about their relationship. The man already feels out of his element and one down. Women, though, keep in training for these conversations with their female friends. I know in some conversations that I have with my wife that she's already talked with Brenda, Holly, Laura, and a number of other people. She already knows the right answer, and she's trying to see if I can get there. Men, by the way, usually come to these conversations with no training at all. In terms of the way men and women like to talk about their days, there are some great differences here, too. Women like to talk about other conversations that they've had during the day and kind of dramatize those situations. I knew one woman who was just expert at this. She would come home and say, "Well, Carolyn said to me," and she'd stand the way Carolyn stood in a snotty voice and use Carolyn's snotty voice. And this is the way women like to talk about their day, and there's a lot of detail, okay? I never met Carolyn, but I know she was a very bad person, okay? Men, on the other hand, like to give a brief summary, kind of an overview. And women feel like they've left out the essence of the experience. Well, what exactly did he say? How did he say it? And men can't remember because they don't remember conversations in that way. And so, but women do remember those details. She can remember exactly what she said, exactly what he said, and in what sequence. And you were standing over there by the fireplace and wearing that red shirt and those shoes that I bought you for Christmas. And she wants him to account for what he said. But it's hard for men to do that because he may have forgotten the entire conversation. And so this is what she suspects. He's just pretending he doesn't remember that conversation. And this is what he suspects. She couldn't possibly remember all that. She has to be making some of this up. So, to conclude, men and women really have similar romantic expectations. It's the small differences and the stylistic differences that add up over time, and that's known as the pressure cooker of continuous contact. Because in a primary relationship where you're together, it doesn't allow for those small differences to be passed over and ignored. If you don't know about differences in conversational styles, then you might assume that there's something wrong with your partner, or worse yet, something wrong with you for having chosen your partner. And so I would suggest that anytime there are differences, that it's a good idea to talk about assumptions that we make, because oftentimes what may seem like bad intentions at first may just be good intentions expressed in a different conversational style. Thank you very much.